hacer. Good morning. We would like to get started. I appreciate your patience. We were attempting to be a little bit responsive to the process of coming into this wonderful facility and the time that might take, but I wanted to make sure that we were able to get started as reasonably close to time as we could. My name is Chris Holden. I'm Assembly member. I represent the 41st Assembly District. I chair this committee, Select Committee on Regional Transportation Solutions, and this is an informal hearing. We're expecting one, maybe two other members to join us. Todd Gloria, who gets a pass because he's coming from San Diego, and Freddie Rodriguez from Pomona. So we will get started. Let me just say that it's our intention to provide hopefully some very valuable information today as it relates to the transportation and the issues of advancing sustainability in our regional transportation projects. But I also am hoping that for the next nearly 2 hours, we will be successful at taking your mind off of last night's Dodger loss. So with that, let me just get started, and thank you again for joining me today for this discussion on how we can advance sustainability in our transportation planning and infrastructure. I'm pleased to welcome you to this beautiful venue, and I want to thank the Ninth Circuit Justices for allowing us to share their historic home. The courthouse began in 1905 as a resort hotel, served as a military hospital during World War II, and saw its current status as a courthouse begin in 1979. The Select Committee has a history of addressing tough issues with our deteriorating transportation infrastructure. We looked at transit connectivity in 2014. In 2015, we held hearings about moving goods, moving people, to look at emerging sustainable paradigms for moving goods from our ports to end users in our communities and across the nation. And in 2016, we tackled the challenge of securing funding for infrastructure improvements. I wanted to take this point in time, a time when we believe we are assured of funding for both large projects and to address billions of dollars in deferred maintenance, to discuss how we can move into a sustainable future for transportation projects. The legislature passed Senate Bill 1 this past spring. This was a bipartisan effort to send the governor a vehicle to invest in bringing roads, bridges, culverts, tunnels, and overpasses statewide into good repair. SB 1 invests $5.4 billion annually over the next decade to fix California's transportation system. It will address a backlog of repairs and upgrades while ensuring a cleaner and more sustainable system for our future. These funds will be protected by a voter-approved constitutional amendment, ACA 5, on the November 2018 ballot. I know there are some concerns with the 12-cent gas tax increase that went into effect yesterday. And for those who already pay considerable gas bills for commuting miles and those living on fixed budgets, the increase does hurt. I voted for SB 1, though, and it was a tough decision. But I couldn't help thinking about what happens if a bridge collapses in the next earthquake or flood. It's happened at Big Sur on Highway 1. What would the cost of lives and property be? Michael Turner will update us on a potential threat to part of this funding, so we look forward to his presentation. My hope today is to foster dialogue and regional cooperation regarding the most pressing transit needs facing local governments. It is the right time to build upon our progress in regional transit and continue exploring ideas for regional connectivity, complete streets, transit, and rail to take people out of their cars and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In 2016, I introduced Assembly Bill 17 to establish a pilot program to provide free or reduced cost transit passes for low-income K-12 and college students. I appreciate the great support of Denny Zane and Move LA and other organizations. AB 17 passed the Assembly and the Senate. Regrettably, the governor vetoed AB 17. I was disappointed by the governor's decision to veto this bill, and at the same time, I look forward to working with his office to ensure next year's budget includes funding to increase transit passes for California's low-income students. A state as large as California faces diverse transportation needs. Budget constraints have often required local solutions to address pressing infrastructure concerns. With the passage of Measure M in Los Angeles County, residents voted for new transportation solutions. We have the opportunity to think outside the box. For example, instead of just focusing on the 710 corridor gap, we should consider extending the light rail to create a loop that connects cities beyond San Gabriel Valley into communities like Downey and Whittier. This way, the conversation can be steered to maintaining the infrastructure we already have and generate new, eco-friendly transport routes for our increasing transit-savvy population. Before any final recommendations are made, we have the opportunity to set a precedent for what transportation can be in California. Our state led the way by building one of the most advanced freeway systems in America. We should lead the way now by taking a 21st century approach to addressing our transportation needs. To that end, today we will be provided with in-depth knowledge from leaders who have successfully built regional transportation projects. For instance, we have benefited from the leadership of Habib Balian, who will update us on the success of the Foothill Gold Line. It has been a breathtaking journey of completed projects on time and under budget. My priority as Assembly member for the 41st District is to work in collaboration with Metro and the Construction Authority to replicate the success of the first phases in completing this next phase to Claremont. I pledged myself to this effort and to extending our collaborative experience to cooperation with San Bernardino County to bring Gold Line to the Montclair Transit Center. Another great effort by local leaders last year occurred as Ontario regained control of its airport. It is not too out of the box to think of future rail connectivity to the airport. Local authorities and agencies are leading the state in implementing green alternatives to transit. We will hear from Doran Barnes from Foothill Transit on the authority's transition to an all-electric fleet by 2030. And Metrolink is leading the nation in transitioning to Tier 4 locomotives to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. When we increase connectivity between our communities, we connect people to jobs and opportunities to start new businesses, and our regional economy benefits. We are aware that California must lead the nation in efforts to confront the effects of climate change. Our out-of-control major fires this year in both wilderness and urban areas has brought home the loss of life and property we must confront with sustainable infrastructure moving forward. There will be challenges, but we will meet them head on, and I'm eager to know my colleagues' thoughts on this as well. And so I'm pleased to introduce Assemblymember Ed Chow, who represents Alhambra, an adjoining community to my district, and he's a good friend. He also chairs the Privacy Committee for the Assembly, and so I'd like to welcome Ed Chow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's great to be here. Let me start off by thanking you, Mr. Chair, for organizing today's event. And today's hearing is extremely important, particularly for our region here. And I also want to thank you for your leadership in the State Assembly on transportation issues. And there's a lot to do, and with the passage of SB 1, we have a few more resources to do it with. So I want to thank all the presenters for being here as well, and I look forward to your testimonies and your proposals to help us find solutions to some of these issues. So I'm really excited to be here. So with that, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Our first panel, and I will call the members who are going to be speaking in the first panel forward. This is going to contain discussion on sustainable communities. And the first person that I'd like to call forward, and if you can kind of fill the first row, and then the first person will lead off, and so if you can make your way to the front table. Colleen Clemenston Colleen is a principal regional planner with the San Diego Association of Governments, focusing on better connecting local land use plans with regional transportation investments. Ms. Clemenston has more than 25 years' experience in public sector land use and transportation planning in the San Diego region, garnering a focus of social health, socioeconomic, and equity efforts. She is the current president of the California Planning Roundtable and a graduate of UC San Diego with a degree in urban planning and economics. Welcome. You can begin. Yep. Well, you know what? Let me just you will begin, but let me just introduce all the other. Our second panelist is Art Yoon. He's the Director of Policy and Public Affairs for the Southern California Association of Governments, the largest metropolitan planning organization in the United States. Mr. Yoon oversees all public affairs and legislative matters at SCAG and collaboratively leads the implementation of SCAG's adopted policies at the federal and state level. Art has over 27 years of experience as a public relations professional in the private and public sectors. Mr. Yoon has served as a member of the Hermosa Beach City Council and also as mayor, and as a staff member of 3 United States congressional representatives and 1 U.S. senator. Welcome, Mr. Yoon. Mark Christoffels. Today Mark is wearing his San Gabriel Valley COG hat, where he serves as Director of Transportation. He represents the San Gabriel Valley on Metro's Measure M and Long Range Transportation Plan Advisory Policy Council. He is also the CEO, Chief Engineer, and of the Alameda Corridor East Construction Authority, where he is responsible for implementing the $1.7 billion ACE program for all rail, roadway grade separations and at-grade crossing safety and mobility improvements. The ACE construction program has been cited as a national model for addressing the impacts of nationally and regionally significant freight, rail traffic on local communities. Welcome, Mark. Our fourth panelist, John Fasana. John was first elected to the Dougherty City Council in 1987 and currently serves as the Mayor Pro Tem. He has represented the San Gabriel Valley community on the Metro Board since the board's inception in 1993 and is the immediate past chair. He has worked tirelessly with his colleagues in Sacramento and Washington, D.C. to secure several billions of dollars for critically needed multimodal congestion relief projects, including the establishment of express lanes. John's tenure as chair of the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments Transportation Committee has led to the creation of both the Alameda Corridor East Construction Authority and the Foothill Gold Line Construction Board. Welcome, John. And our fifth panelist, Doran Barnes. Doran Barnes oversees Foothill Transit's 38 route system, manages the private contractors who operate and maintain the agency's 360 buses, and leads the delivery of services to over 15 million customers annually. Doran also serves as a member of the Board of Directors of Access Services, the regional paratransit operator for all of Los Angeles County. Doran began his transit career as a coach operator at Unitrans, the transit system at the University of California, Davis. Doran also serves as the chair of the American Public Transportation Association. So we welcome all of our panelists for panel 1. And Colleen, the floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today, Chairman Holden and the Select Committee members, to talk a little bit about the sustainable transportation efforts underway in the San Diego region. And we're just so pleased to be included in the discussions of Southern California. So I do have a slideshow here, and I want to be able to show you some pretty pictures of some of the things that we're doing, but just sort of providing the context of regional planning for San Diego. This map shows the metropolitan planning organization boundaries, councils of governments, as well as the regional transportation planning agencies in the state of California. And then the blue shows the SCAG region, the Southern California Association of Governments, MPO. And then purple down in the the very southwest corner of the state is SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments. And we, like SCAG, serve as the metropolitan planning organization for the San Diego region. We are also the RTPA, so we are responsible for allocating state and federal funds for regional transportation projects. We also serve as the consolidated planning agency, so we plan and fund the highways in the region. We plan, fund, and build the regional transit projects in the region. And we also plan and build a number of regional bikeway projects, as well as owning a toll road, which is new in our suite of transportation options. And then lastly, we serve as the Transportation Commission administering the Transnet half-cent sales tax. This is the half-cent sales tax that all residents in the county pay toward transportation purposes. We're bordered by 3 counties, so Orange, Riverside, and Imperial counties. We are adjacent to at the U.S.-Mexican border. We're home to 4 land ports of entry, including the one busiest in the entire nation. We like to say the world, but there's some controversy about that when it comes to Hong Kong and some of the Asian countries. Anyway, just a little bit more. In our region, 18 cities, 1 county, so that's 19 local jurisdictions. We have 2 transit agencies, so by comparison to SCAG, where there's over 160 local jurisdictions, multiple transit agencies, you would hope that we can get around one table and try to do some good regional planning. We also are home to 17 tribal nations, and the tribal nations are all located within the rural areas of the region, which is one of the transportation challenges we face. And finally, one of the things that is somewhat unique about the San Diego region is that we do have a diverse ecosystem, and you can travel from the beach through the foothills, through the forest, to the desert within an hour and be able to touch all of the Southern California ecosystems within that 1-hour drive. It's a little bit longer by transit, but anyway, one of the things that I also wanted to share with you for some context around the San Diego region, and this is true of much of Southern California, how our local land use plans have changed just in the last 15 years. And so these 2 maps show that comparison. The blue dots show projected housing growth based on local land use plans, local general plans, and the purple shows the projected job growth based on local general plans. And so back in 1999, we were projecting a whole lot of additional housing growth out into the rural part of the county. And just 14, 15 years later, you can see that dramatic difference. It's the same number of dots, but with the County of San Diego updating their general plan and really lowering densities throughout the unincorporated area, and the local jurisdictions increasing density near planned and existing public transit, has really made a dramatic change in how the region is projected to grow. A lot of this stems from work that we did to put together what we call a smart growth concept map. So this shows the areas in the region where the cities are planning for higher density mixed use development, and how that aligns with where the region is planning for new transit and where there's existing transit. So this has been the basis for prioritizing transit investments in our region, as well as providing grants to local jurisdictions to help plan for the transit, to help plan for really creating great communities, more dense communities in the San Diego region. So really the focus is in the western quarter of our region. This really set the stage for our work in Complete Streets. I think we all know that Complete Streets is really about serving everyone comfortably and safely on our public roadways, regardless of how it is that they are traveling. And in 2014, the SANDAG Board of Directors took an action as part of the update to our regional plan to include a regional complete streets policy. And what this policy says is that as we are planning new highway projects, new transit projects, new bikeway projects, we need to also consider complete streets in those projects, plan for them, budget for them, and incorporate those aspects. And I think that was I'll share a few examples of projects we went through where we hadn't particularly planned for that, and moving forward how we plan to be able to do it. So a very simple tool, which I would love to share with anyone who's interested, is that we did put together just a checklist for project managers who are working on developing a new transportation project, a checklist to go through so that they're considering complete streets. And we've also adapted that for our local jurisdictions to do as well. And it doesn't mean you have to build it all, but you just are making those considerations when you're thinking about transportation projects. And then we have a web page and a way of trying to track our progress. And then funding for local jurisdictions to actually implement complete streets as envisioned in the regional plan and their local plans. So a little bit, I'm just going to go through 3 Sandag projects where we have a few lessons learned. The Mid-City Rapid is one of our first BRT projects in urbanized San Diego. It runs from Assembly members' alma mater, SDSU, to downtown San Diego. Minimal stops, but this is all done within existing public rights of way. And one of the challenges we found is that we had come up with the budget for the nice stations and the technology that was needed to expedite the buses through traffic signals, but we hadn't really thought through how to help connect people to those transit stations. So that was really a sort of a lesson learned and why we needed to be thinking about complete streets in our projects. Underway right now is a 10-mile extension to our Blue Line trolley. This is the red trolley for those of you who have visited San Diego and seen our trademark trolley. This is the line that runs all the way from the border to downtown, and now we're going to be extending that from downtown up to UC San Diego. This will connect all the major universities and job centers in the region. And on the books for 20 plus years. So again, this isn't a time when we were thinking about how to budget and plan for complete streets, but we have been able to work with the local jurisdictions that have stations along these areas to provide some grant funds to them to do some planning, and then where we can make connections, we're working on doing that. And then on a really grand sort of scale, thinking about complete streets, we know we can't accommodate everything within one transportation project, but how we think of our corridors as being multimodal. And obviously, all of us know that I-5 North is the lifeblood of our economy here in the state and in the San Diego region. We're focusing on a 27-mile stretch of that corridor, which will include the addition of HOV lanes, as well as double tracking the rail line, so all of us taking Amtrak, when you come to visit us in San Diego, it'll go a lot quicker, and a multiple number of bikeways and pedestrian walkways to get to the beach, as well as restoring 6 different lagoons. And so this is really a massive undertaking and a really grand way of sort of thinking about complete streets. So now I'm just going to talk a little bit about the funding programs we have and show you a few examples of what's been done at the local level. The half-cent sales tax in the San Diego region sets aside 4% of revenues to provide grants to our local jurisdictions, to our 19 local jurisdictions, for planning and infrastructure to support smart growth development and active transportation. So far, we've awarded $50 million. That's leveraged another $30 million, and we have been able to fund 100 projects. That's 60 capital projects and 50 planning efforts and educational programs. This has also been supplemented through the Active Transportation Program through the state of California, which has been very beneficial to the region, and we really look forward to Senate Bill 1, as Assemblymember Holden mentioned, as being another way to help implement this. So this is just one example in the city of Escondido where they took 2 through street lanes and turned this into a public plaza, which is really a nice gathering place for the residents. This is right across from City Hall in downtown, and this was about $1 million project. It was a $1 million grant from Sandag, and the rest was supplemented by the city of Escondido. In the city of Oceanside, this was a lane reduction, and they added seating and, you know, nice sidewalks, wider sidewalks, places for people to gather, and has really been an asset to increasing business in their business district. And this was a $2 million grant from the Smart Growth Incentive Program. And then something as simple, this was an educational campaign in the city of Carlsbad called Bike the Village. So we provided funds for a bicycle campaign program as well as bike racks, and this was just a $30,000 project, but even some small things can make such a difference. And then in Hillcrest, this is just north of downtown San Diego, the part of the council district that our current Assembly member Todd Gloria oversees. And this was about $1 million of investments, just enhancing sidewalks, creating bulb outs for this really highly pedestrian area that really hadn't really considered pedestrians until some of these projects were done. And then just a couple of other examples in downtown San Diego. We're looking at doing some reduction in travel lanes for vehicles to create a linear park. Our downtown area is really park deficient, and so that's a way to try to bring back some green space, some places for people to be able to get out and recreate as the area continues to densify in downtown. So the last project I wanted to show you, this is just a photo of the city of Chula Vista. We've invested about $3 million in enhancements in this area, and this is taken, there's 2 lanes that have been reduced on the street, and again, creating plaza areas and really trying to make this a more vibrant business district in the city of Chula Vista. So what we're thinking about now, and I think is important for all of us to be thinking about, how do we incorporate new technologies as we're moving forward? What does this mean in terms of complete streets? I know LA Metro has been thinking about all the drop-offs that we're expecting with the new stations, and just when we're getting Uber and Lyft to take us places, now they're pulling into our bus stops, they're pulling into our transit stops, and we don't have space for them. So something as simple as that to how do we wire things so that we're taking full advantage of emerging technologies. And just the thought I want to leave you with is a concept that we've developed in the San Diego region called a mobility hub. And this really brings together shared use mobility, so shared cars, shares, bike share, transit, higher density mixed use development, and a lot of the amenities that technology can bring us coming together in one place. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you so much for inviting me here today, and I hope that some of these thoughts can be helpful as we all move forward in implementing sustainable transportation projects throughout the state of California.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And there will be questions. We want to move through the panel, and then we'll pet the panels, and then we'll be able to come back and include the public and any questions that they may have as well. So thank you for the presentation. San Diego doesn't look like it did in 1978. Good job.
Good morning, Assemblymember Holden, Assemblymember Chow. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and I also should probably thank you that first apologize. Hassan, my executive director, my boss, wishes he could be here, but we have a board of directors meeting, and so this is my other thank you for getting me out of that and letting me present here. But again, thank you for holding this hearing on opportunities to promote sustainability. Let me see, sorry, let's get to it. Through regional transportation projects. This is a topic of critical importance to us at SCAG. Like all major MPOs in the state, a significant part of our role is to develop a regional sustainable community strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through integrated land use and transportation planning. Our region develops a sustainable community strategy along with a regional transportation plan every 4 years. And I'm pleased to report that we've exceeded the greenhouse gas reduction established by the Air Resources Board in every plan to date. A critical element of reaching our target has been the investment by Metro and our other county transportation commissions in developing a robust transit network. These investments have been complemented by policy changes within our local jurisdictions to plan new growth in transit-oriented communities and through local action and regional partnerships to make it easier for people to walk and bike to stations. And today, I'll talk about the progress we made on our first last mile planning and some of the challenges we face moving forward. However, I think it's important to note that even if we are successful in implementing current plans, we know that it won't be enough to meet more aggressive greenhouse gas targets that are anticipated in the 2020 plan. And we're going to need every tool in the toolbox, every new source of revenue, call the collaboration from people in this room to think of new, innovative, faster, cheaper ways to increase transit ridership, management system demand, and reduce travel by single occupancy vehicles. With that, I'll move forward. Well, to maximize investments in transit, we have to make transit convenient, affordable, safe, and easy to understand. And that's where the First Last Mile initiative comes in. Let me basically show you a little bit of the strategy and implementation so so far. Following the adoption of the region's first RTP, SCAG and Metro adopted the joint work program to facilitate plan implementation. And the key strategy here was to make greenhouse gas reduction benefits of transit systems, increase transit ridership, and minimize the footprint for transit trips. Let me see. Oh. Now, San Diego had pretty pictures. I can't say I have the same. I have sort of ugly pictures, and for a point. So here's what the Metro SCAG study did. After adoption, what we found was concerning. There were significant barriers, major uphill battles to transform the built environments around the stations to make it easy for people living in and around the stations to use the system. So you'll see from some of the pictures, I mean, this is your commute away from stations here in Los Angeles. We picked LA because of the venue where we are. There's obviously some safety and security issues. There's some maintenance issues. Can't really see it very well, but in the lower right-hand corner is a picture trying to illustrate the point that there's some legibility issues. So, I mean, not really readily understandable places for people to kind of walk through their corridors. Let me see, I think I have a couple more. These are just a couple different places. Again, not the prettiest pictures in the world. There's long blocks. People are going to have to cross in places because there's no crosswalks available. I mean, so there's presents safety issues. And this is basically the everyday experience. And the strategy on the study was to identify the highest traveled, most critical routes to transit stations, links to major employment centers, residential areas, other modal options to establish the first last mile network around each station, and invest in bike, pedestrian safety improvements along these networks. Let's talk a little bit about some of the regional planning here. This is not a study plan that just sat on the shelf. SCAG and Metro have taken the findings seriously and taken active measures to implement it. On the regional planning front, SCAG integrated a more fully developed first last mile strategy in the 2016 RTP SCS and identified $3 billion in revenues to support strategy implementation. The results of this investment we project to be a 10% increase in transit ridership and an 82% growth in active transportation trips within corridors, not just to and from stations. Wanted Metro and in collaboration with SCAG, took ownership of the issue rather than relying on individual cities. So included significant funding in Measure M to retrofit stations, making first last miles planning part of the planning for all new stations, and reorganized to accommodate increased planning roles. Let's talk a little bit about the local implementation. With regional and county frameworks in place, ultimately what we needed to realize is changes in the way our streets are planned and designed is the engagement and action of local agencies in our region. So in the last 3 years, we focused on the local implementation and action through a series of programs we've been able to implement thanks to the resources and vision of this legislature, including you gentlemen. And welcome, Assemblymember Rodriguez. I apologized and didn't acknowledge you. But and thanks to the resources and vision of leadership of the legislature on sustainability and transportation. So one of the programs we launched was something we call Go Human, which is a little bit like the program you saw in Sandag. So in Go Human, the object is to kind of build community engagement, change the culture as much as we can, increase awareness of people on the streets and need for motorists to keep an eye out. So the Go Human campaign consists of regional advertising, has regional events and training activities, and SCAG has received additional funding to do another round of advertising and is looking for partners. If your city is interested in partnering, you should reach out to us, and I have a couple different numbers you can reach out to, so we're always looking for friends. But I mean, these are different sort of campaigns that we've kind of launched in and around Los Angeles. It's part of the Open Streets and Demonstration projects. We have integrated marketing campaigns with strategies around infrastructure change, policy change, and encouragement activities. And this is done through Open Streets and Demonstration projects as well as toolkits and trainings. Open Streets and Demonstration projects extend the life of the campaign in engaging ways, provide education, encouragement, and outlets for experience and feedback. These projects kind of showcase proposed infrastructure improvements like scramble crosswalks and for residents to test them out. Designs have also included protected bike lanes and traffic circles, or intersection improvements like mid-block crossings or bullbouts. Projects are paired with events to create a festive environment we showcase placemaking features like seating and shade. Go Human includes programming and family-friendly activities to teach safety and skills for everyone in the family. And elected officials like yourselves speak at the press events and can speak to the vision for the community and other safety priorities. This is some of the example of the community input we've received and also some of the feedback that we've gotten from some of our events. This is something we did in Imperial County. It's probably one of our biggest successes. Imperial is one of the 6 counties that SCAG represents, and among the 191 cities is El Centro, right here in this picture. And many designs that have been tested out and demonstrated in cities across the region have since become permanent. This is the before and after example from the city of El Centro. The other thing that we do is sustainability planning grants. 74% of the cities in Los Angeles County have incomplete active transportation plans, 80% incomplete region-wide. SCAG provides resources to fill that gap. Sustainability planning grants program that SCAG has offered periodically over the last 10 years. Now with SB1, we'll be able to offer programs every other year. SB1 funds will be rolling to projects as early as January 1 of this coming year to support. This is a little about the active transportation program. We have $1 to $2 billion for Southern California projects, and SB1 adds $100 million to that per year statewide. So I wanted to just kind of end with some recommendations. We've developed significant momentum in the area of active transportation and seen tremendous interest from our cities in going even further, but we need the state support, particularly as we face higher greenhouse gas targets. There's some specific opportunities out there. Number one, we can make sure last mile investment is part of the transit planning and funding programs. Number two, we can continue to grow resources and the impact of ATP. And three, we can preserve active transportation funds in SB1 for planning programs and infrastructure. I know there'll be questions afterwards, so I will be available.
Very good. Thank you so much. I'm going to pause for just a moment. I want to introduce a few of our electeds who have joined us, and then I want to give 2 individuals an opportunity to welcome us. First, let me introduce the mayor of the city of South Pasadena, Marina Kubesarian. Is Marina, I think she stepped out. A good friend, another good friend, Don Brown, who is the commissioner with the Hollywood Burbank Airport. Don. And Bob Frutis, council member, city of Burbank. Henry Lowe, board member, Garvey School Board. And Marina just came in. Nice entry, Marina. And if I could, I'd like to have the mayor of Pasadena, who is hosting us today, bring some welcoming remarks, maybe a minute, to welcome us to the fine city of Pasadena, Mayor Terry Tornick.
Chris had to do that because we served on the city council. But again, a belated welcome to this wonderful building. This represents some of the best in Pasadena in terms of repurposing the art building to an active current use. Security measures seem a little bit rigorous this morning. We do welcome you nonetheless. This subject is a subject that is absolutely critical to all of us, which is why we're here, and there are people here who are vitally interested in the whole range of transportation alternatives, and those of us in Pasadena know how important and how vital this is, and we very much appreciate these fine electeds coming to our city and sharing this information with us, because this is a moving target. Frankly, for local officials, it's hard to sort of keep pace with being aware of everything that's available and that's coming. So welcome to Pasadena, and thank you again, Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd also like to recognize and have the judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, Judge Dorothy Wright Nelson, to bring some greetings and welcome us to your fine home. Okay.
So she hasn't made it yet. She's on the way.
Okay. All right. Well, then on that note, let me just welcome 2 additional members who've joined us. We'll give them an opportunity to bring some comments as we make our way through the program, get a chance to get settled. Freddie Rodriguez, Assembly Member representing the community of Pomona and the Ontario Airport, and Assembly Member Todd Gloria, who again, as I mentioned early on, had the longest drive, so we recognize that even though the representative from SCAG, from your neck of the woods, made a fine presentation, there'll be opportunity for Q&A as we make our way through, so welcome to both of you. Okay, let's make our way back to the first panel and our third presenter, Mark Christoffel.
You bring up my presentation? There we go. Good morning. Thank you for inviting us out. Your agenda is perfect. The first two speakers are a perfect segue to what I'm going to talk about. I don't know if you planned it, but it works out wonderful. I'm here representing the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments. We are the largest subregion in LA County, the largest COG consisting of 31 cities with a population of just over 2 million. And what I'm going to address is active transportation, which is a fancy word for walking or biking, and our efforts to get there. And I want to start with a statistic. This was based on a mobility study we did in the San Gabriel Valley. We wanted to kind of find out where everybody was going and how they were getting there. And what won't surprise you is that most people get there in the drive-alone mode. And then you can see going down the line, the carpool, the bus, all the way down to bicycle and walking, with very small percentages of those being in that category. But what's of more interest is down at the bottom. 70% of the trips generated in the San Gabriel Valley end in the San Gabriel Valley. They begin and end in the valley. They're not venturing out of our region. And most of those are 10 minutes in length. Very short. We're only talking a couple of miles. It's primarily probably an individual getting in their car and going to the grocery store and coming back. We know, and you guys know, that that is unsustainable. We cannot continue doing this drive-alone mode for these small trips within our communities. We're already starting to experience what that means. And it's going to get worse as we start seeing us address the housing needs, and we're going to see some more density in our communities. We're going to have to come up with an alternative. So the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments has made it a priority to address that issue up front. And one way to do that is provide an alternative mode. You're going to hear later today from Foothill Transit, from the light rail, from Metrolink. We're putting together the transit modes that are necessary to relieve this issue. But we also need to address, and that's why the earlier speaker was so well-timed, is the first and last mile. How do we get individuals out of their cars and get them so that they will take an alternative mode to get into these mass transits? This is our priority areas, and what we as a Council of Governments are looking at is we want a greenway network. It's a fancy word for a non-polluting network of moving from point A to point B. It is your pedestrian-friendly pathways. It is also your bicycle routes. We are doing that primarily, and you'll see on a later slide, we're attacking those areas where we can readily put in bike trails. A lot of it in the San Gabriel Valley is our unused storm drain channels. There's a lot of right-of-way crisscrossing our communities, and we need to start utilizing that space, an alternative mode to get from point A to point B. Complete streets, you heard the San Diego representative talking about that. First and last mile connections. Bike sharing. Maybe I don't own a bike, or I don't like leaving my bike where I'm going. We're going to go down that road as well. And then obviously education and encouragement. We've got to get people to realize this is an alternative mode that is actually potentially helpful for you. It's going to benefit you, and it's going to benefit the community by getting all of these vehicles off the road. The Greenway Network, we're looking at 135 miles of network in the San Gabriel Valley, of potential routes that will become an alternative to the current vehicle. And we're working slowly through each of the affected agencies, looking at how we can get permits, seeking grants, developing the pieces little by little. Obviously, this doesn't happen overnight, but we are doing extensive planning and how we're going to phase this and get this network in place. By the way, I'll note, the previous speaker talked about the planning grants. The San Gabriel COG was a recipient of one of those planning grants, and we're utilizing that money to move forward on that network. Complete streets. We actually have a couple of experimental ones already in place, Rosemead Boulevard in Temple City and Main Avenue in Baldwin Park. we need to learn. We need to put these things out there, and we need to experiment and see what kind of reaction we're going to get. I mean, a lot of it is theoretical. It's on paper. If we do this, they're going to come and use it. But this gives us the advantage of actually seeing something in real terms and moving forward. First and last mile connections, as I indicated, that's really our priority, as we're now going to see the Gold Line, and Habib's going to talk about that, extending further into the San Gabriel Valley. We're going to have more stations. And of course, we're seeing the use much higher than most people thought it was going to be, which is great. The ridership is there. But along with that comes the parking issue. The parking lots are all inundated. Many people have already shared that. They'd like to take that transit, but when they get down there, there's not enough parking. And they're talking about how to deal with that. Is that really the best land use for us to mow out and create even more parking? Or do we create an alternative way to get to these transit modes? And that's something that we're going to be looking at. Education and encouragement. We regularly are going out to the community. We're seeking their input. We have the Ciclavia events, you know, where you close the street and you encourage people to get out there. Let them try it. Let them experiment. See what a joy it is to leave your car at home. And maybe next time you need to get one item at the grocery store, you might actually consider riding that bike instead of actually getting in that car and drive alone there. And then incentives. Here's an interesting one. Bicycle-friendly business districts. What if our business districts are actively encouraging the bicycle rider? Provide a place where that bicycle can be parked. Provide a discount to the individual that comes to your store via bike rather than drive in there. I think if we can do that and people try it and they start liking it, I think eventually we may get this turnover from the single driver vehicle. We've also got the advantages, the younger generation, the millennials and others that are coming up, they're actually not car-centric like most of us were because we grew up with our automobiles. They're willing to try this stuff, but we've got to give them the means to move forward. We have to divert slightly from what we've already created in terms of infrastructure and create the means for them to do that. And then I wanted to say that in our push, we were very proud to say that we got a $4.5 million grant to introduce a bike share program. It'll be well over 800 bikes throughout the community that will hopefully be in by this time next year, spread out through our region. We're going to figure out where the best places are for these bicycles. We're working with Metro. We're hoping that we incorporate the tap card for these bicycle usage so that it becomes even easier for the individual to grab a bike, go to a transit mode, and then continue on in their way. At both ends of the system, by the way. And then finally, there was a comment made earlier about Assemblymember Holden, SB1. You know, for those out there that don't believe there's a need for SB1, and I mean, obviously need is the potholes and the crumbling infrastructure, but this identifies the pent-up demand for, in this case, it was an SB1 set aside for active transportation. This is just the San Gabriel Valley going after these SB1 funds. There is a pent-up need for these dollars. We need to have them available so that we can get these projects implemented and moved on. And that ends my presentation, and I'll be around for questions.
Chair Holden, members of the Select Committee, and the public, good morning. I'm John Fasana. I'm the Mayor Pro Tem of Duarte, and I, for many years, have represented San Gabriel Valley cities on the Metro Board. And my topic today is the 710 gap closure, but I'm probably going to extend a little bit beyond that. It's no secret that at one point, in fact, I had been in favor of completing the gap, but I think it's become quite apparent that not only was there not support for tunneling under or building over or building on the surface for the roadway, but I think this lesson really extends even beyond to the rest of our highway network that is built out as this region is, with the lack of open space, that the highway system we have today is likely what we're going to have over the next 30 years or 100 years. Maybe an added lane here, maybe an improved interchange there. And there certainly are those opportunities. But we are where we are today. The Metro Board in May did approve a motion to recommend to Caltrans that they select the TDM TSM alternative as opposed to the build out of a twin tunnels or a single bore tunnel or a busway or a light rail system to fill the gap through Pasadena, El Sereno, Alhambra, and South Pasadena. So what's happening in the interim? Obviously, we wait for Caltrans to determine what their ultimate decision will be. There certainly was a lack of funding to complete the project, even if there had been support for it. Also, we recognize that the highway system has been extremely congested, so you'd be linking very congested segments of the freeway network, which was not really what was being considered maybe 30 or 40 years ago. There was more movement on other aspects of the corridor. So I'm pleased to report that the jurisdictions in the corridor, and I speak to Pasadena, South Pasadena, Alhambra, are working collaboratively to figure out how to address north-south movement within the corridor and how to do that collaboratively. So I think moving forward, we're going to wait to see ultimately what Caltrans does, but we did preserve over $600 million of Measure R funds for the San Gabriel Valley and really for improvements within that corridor in particular. So we have some resources to try and deal with the infrastructure that you have when you have stubs on each end of the corridor and other improvements that were made even though the tunnel was ultimately not constructed. So we look forward to seeing what transpires at that point. We're looking at things such as regional transit service improvements. We know the cities are looking at these as well. There could be some multi-jurisdictional transit service, signal synchronization, maybe looking at enhancements to some of the city streets and coordination there to figure out how we can still move people north-south. Also looking at parking improvement to try and make the corridor more effective for the remaining existing streets that are in place. We talked about the stubs and the freeway interchanges. What can we do to make those more effective and maybe distribute traffic more effectively throughout the north-south corridor? So at this point, you know, the Metro Board action is a recommendation of strong intent. It does create opportunities to expend those funds for other improvements in the corridor. I do want to talk about, again, what does this really mean? First of all, I want to amplify my support for what you have heard, what you're going to hear. I was a huge supporter of Measure M, a huge supporter of SB1. We need additional transit in this region. We need additional choices for our customers. But I do have some observations, really, I think, that tie somewhat to the highway system post-710. As I said, the network we have today is what we're going to have, and we need to serve more than 2 million new residents over the next 30 years with the network that we have, who will be occupying new housing that hopefully we can get built in a timely manner. So we need to not only preserve the corridors, but Mark talked about our existing rights-of-way. We need to treat all these corridors as scarce strategic assets. We need to identify them, and even if we can't fund or envision improvements for them immediately, we need to at least assess them and start looking at them for bikeways, walkways, and even potentially light rail. So that's important. But also efficiently using our highways. And I want to speak to one program that we implemented several years, the Express Lanes program on the 10 and the 110. We have technology today that allows us to more effectively manage movement of people. And again, the goal, we probably have, if you want to look at the capacity to move more people, we have more capacity in our highway system than we do through any other mode in this region, just because of the scope of our highway system. But that scope can only be realized if we start seeing a lot more vans and transit vehicles and fewer single occupant vehicles on the roads. So we have some opportunities on how we manage that. And we took our first initial step with the express lanes on the 10 and the 110 by using the electronic transponders. I think it's also time to look at the HOV3 and HOV2 requirements. They are a legacy of the 1970s, but with today's transponder technology, you have a much more efficient means of encouraging and the formation of true carpools and really freeing up the California Highway Patrol to do the safety inspections and services that they need to provide. So I will say the 10 expressway, which within the San Gabriel Valley is probably nearest and dearest to me of all our carpool lanes, that was originally built as a busway in the 1970s. It was an exclusive busway until the late 1970s. After a transit strike, it was converted into a high occupancy vehicle lane network as well. With all the investment we have in the El Monte busway and with the tremendous investments that Foothill Transit is making to an electrified bus fleet, too many of those vehicles are sitting in rush hour, not creating the advantages to users. So I would say that this is one of the things that we need to focus on. Congestion probably is inevitable if we don't really try and manage demand. We manage demand on the electric grid. Theater owners manage grid, manage usage into the movie theaters by time of day. We too have technologies today that can help us manage demand and encourage formation of carpools or use of transit on our highway system. So I'm hoping that we can take the next steps on keeping our lanes moving. The highway system can move about 1,800 vehicles efficiently and move the most amount of vehicles. If you try and move more than that, you actually see the system break down. It turns into a parking lot and you're moving actually fewer vehicles. With real-time pricing capabilities, we have the ability to manage that demand and encourage formation of carpools, van pools, and more effective use of the bus system. So I'll leave you with that in addition to all the other things that have been said today, which I fully endorse and look forward to answering any questions. And certainly appreciate your leadership in addressing and helping us to have a state-of-the-art transportation system. Thank you.
Before we hear from our last presenter for this panel, we've been joined by a judge or presiding judge of the United States Court of Appeals, Ninth Circuit, Judge Dorothy Wright Nelson, who will bring us greetings. We appreciate you opening up the doors of the Ninth Circuit for us to hold our hearing this morning, and we look forward to your comments. And we also appreciate, although it slowed us down a little bit, the security to come in and be a part of this facility, and we understand the protocol around that. But again, thank you for being here and being a gracious host.
Honored guest, we are thrilled to have you here. You might wonder why we aren't holding court. We're an appellate court, and we only hold court 1 week a month, the first week. And then I was home writing opinions, and I was told, Assemblyman Chris Holden is going to drop by tomorrow. Will you see him? And I said, I'd be delighted. When I came and saw all these cars, I realized this was a very important meeting. This is your courthouse. You're welcome to come first week, full week of every month and observe in the courtroom. We offer you tours if you want to see our courthouse, but we're especially happy to have public service use our building for a very good purpose. So welcome, welcome. We hope to see you back, and I wish you well with your meeting. I'm a resident of Pasadena, and we need you.
Thank you, Judge Nelson. Mr. Barnes.
Well, good morning, Chair Holden, members of the committee. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you here today. And certainly it's already been very interesting in terms of the other presenters and the linkages between the challenges that we all face. When I think about sustainability and I think about where we are in terms of what's happening in transportation, there's this really interesting confluence between transportation, energy management, and technology. And I'm going to take a little bit deeper dive than some of the other presenters in terms of what we're doing as that confluence of energy, transportation, and technology are impacting the work that we do and the services that we deliver here in the San Gabriel Valley. Just to give you a little bit of background on our organization, Foothill Transit was created in 1988. We operate 39 fixed routes throughout the San Gabriel Valley. Our fleet size is 369 buses, and most of our vehicles are powered with compressed natural gas, and that's part of our commitment as well as our regional partners' commitment to sustainability. We operate one of the cleanest fleets in the nation, along with LA Metro and various other operators in the region. So sustainability and commitment to the environment has always been near and dear to what we do. I'm going to talk about our electric bus program in much more detail, but just to give you an idea of our scope, we're roughly 14.8 million passenger boardings per year. And if you look at us in terms of system size, we usually rank about 50th in North America in terms of system size. So we're big enough to be able to do some interesting projects like advance electric vehicles, and at the same time small enough to really be able to have the focus on those projects that we take on. This map, which is probably a little difficult to read, but this looks like a bunch of spaghetti on the map here. That's the San Gabriel Valley. If you look about dead center, that's the city of West Covina. And I think the thing to just pull from this map is that this shows not only the routes that Foothill Transit operates throughout the San Gabriel Valley, but also our connections to our many partner organizations, including the Metro Gold Line, Metrolink, Omnitrans in San Bernardino County, Metro Bus and OCTA, along with Montebello Bus Lines, plus all of the city services. And again, as we go through today, and as I've heard the other speakers, it continues to strike me that we are all parts of this bigger environment, this bigger mobility environment, where we all come together to work together to get people from where they are to where they need to be. And none of us does that alone. We have to have those linkages. Certainly first mile and last mile is very important to what we do. If people can't get to the bus, they're not going to use our service. So we are very, very interested and engaged in what's happening from a first mile, last mile standpoint. Again, it's all part of the mobility ecosystem. I want to tell you a little bit about our electric bus program, and Foothill Transit has been very, very proud and excited to be a national leader and in some respects an international leader in the deployment of electric vehicles. Our first electric vehicles were deployed in 2010, and they operate, the center of operation is at the Pomona Transit Center. They go north to the city of Laverne and south to the
Pasadena. But throughout the alignment, from Chinatown all the way through Pasadena, and now looking further east, we see about 12,500 new housing units, over 3 million square feet of commercial space, 1,400 hotel rooms, and just almost $7 billion worth of private investment into the corridor. We look at what's remaining, and the TOD investment that's ultimately to be here available to this region is about 1,200 acres of land that run through this corridor in a linear way, all the way from one end of the county to the other. And it's roughly the equivalent size of the financial district of downtown. And we see that opportunity for these cities to plan correctly. And we've worked with the cities over the last decade in making sure that they are prepared for this and that they are considering a transit-oriented development and higher density around the light rail. And as you know, this has historically been a freight railroad, and a lot of the cities have turned their back on the railroad over the years. And now with this opportunity of this investment, this $3 billion investment in transit, they're now rethinking how the cities are going to be developed and looking for density around these stations, and obviously it's something that we support. And you look at the next phase of the project, it's another 17,000 housing units expected, 10 million square feet of commercial space, additional hotel rooms, and overall $9 billion worth of private investment. So it's significant, and it's something that we are looking forward to as we extend the project east. We have strong support for this project, strong support for TOD. The cities have issues with population growth and where are they going to put all these people. Rather than tearing down single-family homes, they're looking at density, and they're more accepting of it. I think you look out east, a lot of the cities you never would have thought 10 years ago what they'd be considering today, and the reality is sunk in, and they are planning for that. And we see it in their specific plans, in the work that they've done over the years to work with the construction authority to make sure that they're anticipating it and that they're moving forward to sustainable cities and looking to that development. And just a last reminder, we are breaking ground on the project on December 2nd. It'll be at Citrus College. This is in honor of awarding our first contract and being underway with our procurement for the second contract, which will be awarded in a year from now. And we look forward to seeing you on December 2nd and ultimately to the opening in 2026. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Mitch?
Good morning. First, I'd like to extend Susan Branson's regrets that she was unable to attend today. Unfortunately, she's home with laryngitis. I was reading recently that one of the signs of a good boss is how nervous the staff is before their boss has to make a big presentation. And I can tell you I was hoping to be on the job for more than 2.5 weeks before I had to pinch hit. As you all know, the freight industry is very important to California. It's responsible for 1/3 of the state's economy. Freight-dependent industries account for over $700 billion in revenue and over 500 million jobs. The legislature and the governor recognized this with the passage of SB 1 last April, which included $300 million a year dedicated to the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. A decade ago, the voters similarly recognized the importance of transportation with Proposition 1B, which was $20 billion bond measure, which included $2 billion for freight infrastructure improvements, and $1 billion for cleaner freight vehicles. In the last handful of years, the state has embraced freight planning in earnest. In 2014, Caltrans prepared the California Freight Mobility Plan, and the Air Resources Board developed several freight-specific plans aimed at reducing air quality. And in 2015, the governor issued an executive order directing the state agencies to coordinate more to develop a comprehensive plan to integrate the freight plans and identify how to maintain California's important freight industry while implementing steps to reduce emissions. This is the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan. With the recent passage of AB 179, the Commission and the Air Resources Board will be holding joint meetings twice a year to discuss this plan and other transportation issues. We've talked a lot, you've heard a lot about SB1. This is the logo for it. You'll be seeing it hopefully very soon on roads near you. There's also a website, rebuildca.ca.gov. You can go on there right now and see a map of projects that have already been approved. Caltrans, with the Commission, has advanced $3.4 billion in projects in the State Highway Operation and Protection Program. We've awarded active transportation programs in December. It'll have been almost $200 million. And then local streets and roads funding, which amounts to about $400 or $500 million. We have project lists up there. Those were just submitted to the Commission about a week and a half ago. These are all the programs. The ones in bold are ones that go through the Commission. By December, we'll have guidelines for what will be more than $18 billion worth of projects. As you can see, we've been quite busy. We recognize the need is great. We want to get the dollars to work as quickly as possible. We're pushing the timelines on all our programs as aggressively as possible while still ensuring transparency and accountability and that public input is considered. Additionally, the Commission will be developing accountability guidelines that go across all our programs to ensure that the public gets what they're paying for. In terms of the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program specifically, this funding is dedicated to infrastructure improvements for California's key freight corridors. Projects will stimulate economic activity, enhance trade, and preserve or create jobs. These projects will also contribute to the emission reductions in terms of greenhouse gases, diesel particulates, carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, and other pollutants. The initial award of projects in May will cover more than $1.3 billion in funding. It'll be projects that are from this year through the fiscal year 1920. It will include the SB1 funds. It will leverage federal freight funds, and in addition, we're requiring a 30% match of local funding. The legislation has some targets, programming targets for this funding. 40% of the funding is targeted towards statewide needs for projects that are nominated by Caltrans. Additionally, there are targets that we have developed for different transportation corridors and amount for other areas of the state, recognizing that everybody has some impact for transportation. To be eligible for funding, projects must be on a designated freight corridor to support the objectives of the program. Recipients will be required to report twice a year to the Commission on how they are implementing their projects, and once the project is completed, a final delivery report to help ensure that the public is getting the benefits that we're paying for. These are the key dates for the program. The guidelines were just adopted, and the call for projects began a little over a week ago. Applications are due the end of January, and in middle of March, we'll be adopting the program of projects. With that, I'd like to note that there's more information on this program on our website, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, and great job on your first outing.
Thanks.
Art?
Good afternoon. It's nice to be here with you. My name's Art Leahy. I'm CEO of Metrolink, which is a lot harder than being a bus operator, sir.
Right.
I'm pleased to be here with you. I want to talk about Metrolink. I have a little presentation I'll show in a minute. Our primary role is to relieve the freeways in Southern California. If you reflect on it, as Director Fasano was saying a while ago, the freeways in LA are basically done. They're basically done in Orange County. There's a big project down there, but it's on the middle of the freeway, not on the outsides. Same thing's going to happen in a few years in Riverside and San Bernardino. So we have a situation in which the population is growing and spreading out. More and more people living in the outlying areas, but we have a freeway system with basically fixed capacity. So that means as we look for ways to relieve the freeway, what I think you'll see from my presentation is that the most cost-effective way of doing this is Metrolink. And I'll go through some of the reasons why I make that statement. I'm going to comment briefly on the future. We're working on double tracking throughout the system. Much of the Metrolink system, which is almost 600 miles long, serves 6 counties, is single track. That means there's one pair of tracks, so trains can't pass each other. So the service schedule is very fragile. As time goes on, we'll be double tracking. This will be going on for the next decades. We're working on grade separations. That is also a source of problems throughout Southern California. So we have a number of projects in that area that we're working on. We're working on increasing speed. As regards safety, PTC, train control protection, we are the number one commuter railroad in the country, the first to have that in place. In fact, we just started working with BN on having a mutually working system. We are experimenting with lower fares. I think we're seeing some good results in the Antelope Valley. We want to apply elsewhere. We have bikes and surfboards on our trains. We have now, as of yesterday, we can get next train information on your computer, your handheld device. So let me go through the presentation now. So this is the map of the system. As you can see, we go down deep into San Diego and Oceanside, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, Antelope Valley, and out to Ventura. Not so much on the west side of downtown Los Angeles, but there's a great deal of service there that parallels the major freeways, which, as we all know, are congested. We also work very closely with the freight railroads. We control the movement of a lot of freight trains throughout Southern California, and the corridor up from the ports, of course, connects with the same rail lines that we run on. So we work very hard to coordinate and coordinate our services with the freights. About 60% of our passengers ride in more than one county. They cross county lines. That means that we benefit from a great deal of long-range trips. The average trip length is 36 miles on Metrolink. That's much longer than you'll see in most transit systems around Southern California. In fact, if you look at our daily boardings, it's about 43,000, 44,000 a day. That looks very small compared to others. But if we look at our passenger miles, because the trip lengths are so long, in fact, what happens is that Metrolink is the second busiest carrier in Southern California after Metro, but ahead, for example, ahead of Orange County, Riverside combined because of these very long trips. The majority of our passengers, the big majority, have cars. So the combination of long trips with riders who have cars means that these are cars off the freeway. So Metrolink benefits the 5, the 60, the 10, the 91, the 134. So that is, I think, if I had to make an economic argument, the most important benefit that Metrolink provides. I've already mentioned passenger trips. What's really important about Metrolink to get is that about 44% of our operating costs are covered by either passenger fares or the fees that the freight railroads pay us to run on our tracks. That is by far the highest return percentage of any transit system in Southern California by a long shot. As a consequence of that, because of the long trips and the high fares and the low subsidies, we see here over on the left that Metrolink has about the lowest passenger subsidy per passenger mile of any system in Southern California. It's a very good buy for the taxpayers. We've just gotten in some new locomotives, which are the cleanest in the country. So we're working to reduce emissions and, of course, to help contribute to the economy. Obviously, a great deal of our services are tax write-off for people so they can ride at less cost than they would otherwise have to pay if there was no tax write-off. We are the first railroad in the country to have Tier 4 locomotives. They are the cleanest in the country right now. They have better onboard diagnostics. They get higher horsepower, and they can travel faster. So we're really pleased to get them, and emissions are down 80%. So I would just note for you that last Friday we had the 25th anniversary of Metrolink. So it's a relatively new service in Southern California. It's one that's hard to believe, but a few years ago we didn't have any rail in Southern California. Now Metrolink has emerged as a very important carrier on cross-county trips. So with that, I will close and be pleased to answer any questions you might have.
We will take our final presenter, and then we'll see if any members have any questions of this panel before we then move to the next panel. Our next presenter, Ron Miller.
Good morning. I'm Ron Miller, Executive Secretary of the LA Orange County Building Trades. And thank you, Assemblymember Holden, for having us here today, and the panel members. It's good to be here. And it's also good to be here to talk about something that's working today. And I'm not so sure that if we were in Washington, we'd be able to do this. But we're in California where we get stuff done. And it's because we are able to elect good people to send to Sacramento that know how to work together. So there's all my sucking up. I'm done for that. But let me
just say that yours is the best presentation so far.
I know it would be. Let me tell you a little bit about the building trades. We, in LA and Orange County, I represent 140,000 hardworking men and women. In the state of California, we're over 400,000 strong. We have over 90% of the apprentices in the state of California, which equals over 60,000. In 2011, in LA and Orange County, we had between 4,000 and 5,000 apprentices in our programs. As of today, we sit at over 10,000 apprentices, and we're on track to double that within the next 5 years. Back in 2011, 2012, the CEO of Metro, which was Mr. Leahy, sat down with my predecessor, Robbie Hunter, which is now the state building trades guy, and they negotiated an agreement with Metro for Measure R work, $40 billion worth of work for a 5-year term. At the beginning of this year, I was lucky enough to be able to sit down with Metro and extend that agreement for 10 years. And it was predicated on how efficient and how successful that project agreement was. We've also included the Measure M work in on it now. So it's been a very successful project. And as of June of 2017, we've did 5.5 million hours of work. And that's a lot of proof in how successful it is. And we've created a lot of good jobs along the way, and not just jobs, but careers. They pay good wages, good benefits, and a modest pension to men and women of the building trades that work day in and day out for private contractors. So they have to be competitive if they're going to be successful. And it's evident that they're successful because you see them every day wherever you go in LA County and Orange County and up and down the state. They're the men and women that are working on the streets, the freeways. You may not like them at the time you're seeing them because they're causing traffic jams, but that's progress. And once it's done, wherever they've touched, we're better for it. With that agreement, there was local hire provisions or targeted hire provisions, and you know, the average building trades worker is in the mid 40s. So there's a lot of them that are looking to retire. A lot of them have the same hair color I have, and they're within 5 or 10 years of being a baby boomer wanting to retire. So we have quite a task at hand, coupled with we're in the largest building boom since the 1920s here in LA County. We have to backfill our ranks. So as part of that agreement, there is targeted hire, and we do work within the community to bring folks into our apprenticeship programs. And one of the things that we've started here in the last couple of years is a pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship readiness program. And we found the need for it because we have to get folks ready for the construction trades. There's a lot of work coming up in the future. Vocational education in the high schools is pretty well decimated. So the National Building Trades came up with a curriculum. We formed a separate 501c6 organization within the LA Orange County Building Trades. We're going after grant money. We're helping to fund the programs to get folks from the community and in the high schools ready for the construction trades, because it's proven that not everybody goes to college now. And the construction trades are a good middle-class career, which is, the middle class is slowly eroding in this country. So we're doing our part to get folks ready and trained up so that they can backfill the spots from when people retire. And we deal with a lot of community groups. We're in the community colleges, we're in the high schools. We even partner with a group here that's I know near and dear to Assembly Member Holden's heart, is the Flint Ridge Center. They deal with formerly incarcerated youth from 18 to 24. So we're looking at all avenues to bring into our trades and give them the opportunity to get into apprenticeship programs so that they can be successful members of society. These agreements have a requirement for local hire. They also have a requirement for 20% of the hours to be worked by apprentices. And these apprentices, they work on the job during the day and they're paid, and then they go to school at night. So that's how they learn their trade. They're 4 to 5 year apprenticeship programs. And that's how I got in the trade 40 years ago. I'm a plumber. Started an apprenticeship 40 years ago. And I never thought I'd be standing here talking to you folks. But here I am. And I got to say that it's been a great career and very rewarding. And that's the building trades in a nutshell. We're here. You see us every day. And it's good to go last, because everybody that stood up here and talked about projects today, the men and women of the building trades are on those projects. So it's very successful. And in California, we're lucky that we can show that when coalitions are built like this, whether it's John Fasana or Art Leahy or the folks we send to Sacramento, when we work together, we can be very successful. And that's what this transportation program is. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Ron. We appreciate your presentation. I'm going to see if we could, and I know you have to take off, but if we can maybe hold our questions, we'll go to panel 3, and then at the end of panel 3, if we have any questions between the two panels amongst the committee, that we can entertain those, and then we can go right to the public comment. My goal is to have us finished by 1 o'clock. So if I could, I'll transition to our third panel, and we just ask you to hold on if you can. This particular group is going to focus on what we can expect from SB 1. There are 2 members of the panel, so I think we can be efficient in moving through the topic. To lead us off, Michael Turner is the Deputy Executive Officer of Government Relations for LA Metro. In that role, Mr. Turner manages the agency's Government Relations Department. He has worked on Metro-sponsored legislation related to a variety of transportation issues, from infrastructure financing, innovative project delivery, congestion pricing, and the legislation authorizing Measure R. Additionally, Mr. Turner is active in various statewide transportation-related groups and has worked to develop consensus around major transportation issues in the region. He has a bachelor's degree in psychology from UCLA and a master's degree in urban planning from USC. Must be very difficult to sit at a game that you have both of those teams playing. So we welcome you. Thank you. Carrie Bowen is our second panelist. Carrie is the District 7 Director of Caltrans, representing Los Angeles and Ventura counties. A 25-year veteran of California's highway and transportation system, Ms. Bowen oversees the safe and sustainable operation and maintenance of this system that has a construction program of more than $2.3 billion, along with the district's 2,500 employees. She is a respected professional in environmental planning and was instrumental in the success of Caltrans' preparation for and implementation of the National Environmental Protection Act delegation. So we welcome both of you. Michael, you can lead us off.
Thank you, Chairman Holden, Assemblymember Gloria, good to have you here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about SB1, and you wanted me to touch on the repeal, so I'll be sure to mention that. And Carrie and I have a little bit of an overlapping presentation, but the one thing I want to underscore about that is actually the partnership that's required to implement a measure like this. We have a very good relationship with Caltrans, a very good partnership at the district level, and that's very important for bringing all these infrastructure projects forward. So what I want to focus on today is obviously SB1. This is a major investment in the state's transportation system. It is well overdue. The state hasn't made a major investment like this in transportation since the 70s. The gas tax hasn't been touched in over 25 years, and if you've bought anything over the last 25 years, you find it's a little bit more expensive than it was 25 years ago. And so the cost of everything in transportation goes up just like other commodities and things in the world goes up. So it's important for the state to have taken this step to put a significant investment into our transportation system. And we recognize that it was a difficult vote at the legislature. Two-thirds votes are always difficult, but it is a very important vote, and we want to keep that faith going by making sure those investments get put in place. We keep the faith with the voters and put that money to work as quickly as possible. So SB1 is basically a very comprehensive funding program. It provides $5.2 billion a year statewide. LA County can expect to see about $1 billion of that in investments across the county. That's money that some of it comes to Metro, some of it goes to Caltrans, some of it goes to cities and counties for local street and road repair projects, but it funds a variety of improvements. Another thing to point out is that the measure would be protected by a constitutional amendment, so it has to go for transportation. And a lot of that money goes for new capacity expanding projects as well as just fixing the roads. This is a slide that no one can see because the font is so small, but what it basically points out are all the various funding categories that SB1 provides. There's a lot of money goes to fixing our highway system. A lot of money goes directly to cities and counties, as I mentioned, for street and road repair. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically later about the transit funding that comes to Metro specifically. And Carrie will talk about some of these other categories. The money comes from existing funding sources, things people already pay at the pump, gas taxes, diesel taxes. There are some new sources, fees on zero-emission vehicles. And it's important to note that electric cars basically pay nothing to use the road now. There is no charge. Since they buy no gas, they pay no gas tax. So electric vehicles, while it's important that they are achieving one of the state's clean air goals, they are not paying to fix the roadway or use the roadway. And that's a change that comes with SB1. This is what I really wanted to focus on, is the transit funding and how it's distributed. There is a significant investment, and you see almost $800 million that goes into transit. This will help build new transit projects as well as help keep the system in a state of good repair. There's $300 million that comes from the diesel sales tax. There's another $350 million that comes through the transportation improvement fee. That's the fee on vehicles, as well as money that's allocated to a new congested corridor program. And that is eligible to transit projects as well as highway projects, but that is one of the categories that will allow for new capacity expansion projects in the state, as well as dealing with key choke points around the state of California. This is important for Metro because our board, through the adoption of Measure M, which had 71% approval by the voters in LA County, is engaged in the largest transit expansion of any agency in the country. We need the SB1 money to go along with that. Another big initiative that this will help support is the conversion of our fleet to zero-emission buses. Our board has committed to converting our fleet of about 2,400 buses to all-electric buses by 2030, and we need this money to make that happen. As I mentioned, the money is protected. It's protected by Assembly Constitutional Amendment 5, which is going to be on the ballot in June 2018, and of course, like all constitutional amendments, needs a majority to pass. And this is a quick rundown of how Metro will use the money. As I mentioned, we can expect to see about $1 billion a year in funding into Los Angeles County. That means major highway repairs, such as the work that's being done on the 210. And if you've ever driven that stretch of highway, you're familiar with where all the potholes are. And it's good to see that work going on, even though I know people in the area are getting a little sick of that work, but it's a very important work that needs to be done. I mentioned the money that goes to street and road repair projects out in the San Gabriel Valley. That kind of money funded some of the improvements you've seen along Rosemead Boulevard throughout the San Gabriel Valley. And as I mentioned, it'll fund our conversion to electric buses. I've also mentioned the rail service, which is another key expansion that we're looking at. And Carrie will talk about this a little bit further, but it will also provide funding for freight improvements in Los Angeles County. As you know, LA is home to the third largest port complex in the world. 40% of what comes into the nation through containerized cargo comes into the port of Los Angeles and then travels along our highway and rail network as it moves on to the rest of the country. And SB1 will provide the first dedicated stream of funding to, for goods movement projects in Los Angeles County and throughout the state. And then last, this is basically our roadmap. This is the Measure M map of projects, and this is how we would use the SB1 dollars. Measure M was a significant investment in the transportation system in Los Angeles County, but it does not fund everything, and SB1 dollars are needed for that. So as we work through implementing Measure M, we will look to partner those SB1 dollars with the Measure M investments. And then lastly, let me just touch on the repeal efforts. As I think most people know, there are two attempts to try and repeal SB1. Those measures are expected to be on the November 2018 ballot. We are very concerned about those. Our board supported SB1. We supported every transportation funding increase that was introduced in the legislature in the last 2 years, and we were one of the only public agencies in Sacramento arguing in support of this measure. So while we have not taken a position to oppose those measures, we will be looking to take a position in the not too distant future. It's a little frustrating because Prop 13 requires a 2/3 vote for taxes. The legislature took a 2/3 vote to pass the measure, but you can, somebody with enough money can put a measure on the ballot and repeal it with only a majority vote. And that is unfortunate, but that is the process in California. As I mentioned, the measures are on the November 2018 ballot. We are very concerned about them, and it will certainly threaten funding not just in Los Angeles County, but throughout the state as a whole. Okay, that I will conclude and then take questions after Carrie.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I have before I get started, I have a short presentation I'd like to play for you on the Road Repair and Accountability Act and how District 7 will use the funds in LA and Ventura. And then I'll go on to kind of give a broader approach to how we'll be using those funds in Southern California. It's about a 4-minute video. Thank you. Not gonna work? Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Another time.
Nice use of the logo, though.
Okay. So for every $1 billion invested in transportation, as Ron Miller mentioned, it creates jobs. It creates 13,000 jobs. So we know a large part of those jobs are going to be given to some of his members. See if I can get coordinated enough. I'm going to skip this slide because my partner at Metro talked about that. In Southern California, at the October Transportation Commission, 90 Caltrans projects worth $5 billion were moved forward as a result of revenue expected to come in January. And across Southern California, we programmed or advanced the following amounts: $2.3 billion in pavement repairs, $841 million in bridge repairs. Of that $841 million in bridge repairs, $710 million were here in Los Angeles and Kern, and shared between Los Angeles and Kern, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a minute because it's freight related. $140 million in drainage and culvert repairs. And why I wanted to kind of single that out as we have upcoming storms here for the weekend. We're always grateful for the rain after that long drought we experienced, but because we had a shortage of funding for the last couple of decades, our infrastructure, we were piecemealing our infrastructure, especially our culverts and drainage. And then when we get floods or rains, our storm system backs up all over Southern California, and we start experiencing some problems on our freeways. So we still may experience that. We also had some fires, some devastating fires in Northern California. So what happens after the floods and the rains? Then we have unstable hillsides. So, you know, we are concerned about that. We had some of the worst storm damage in the last year that we've ever had, over $1 billion in storm damage. So I do want to point that out as well. And we had $935 million in transportation management system repairs, advanced. All this at the October Transportation Commission in advanced projects in expectation of this money. So that's pretty exciting stuff. And this was in San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, San Diego, and Imperial counties, those projects specifically. So, well, too fast. Mitch Weiss talked about the importance of freight movement, and it generates about 1/3 of California's $2.2 trillion economy, and we needed to move more efficiently. The Trade Corridor Enhancement Program is competitive, and a few of the projects that we're submitting to go forward is the construction of the 7th border crossing at the Mexico-California border, Otay Mesa, the 5760 Confluence Project, and Rice Avenue in Ventura. They're also going for infra, and a couple of other projects. The freight corridor projects that I mentioned that were part of that bundle of projects, one of them was a $55 million project on State Route 60 that included 4 bridges in Orange, San Bernardino, and LA County. The other was 10 different bridges, or $500 million in projects in LA and Kern County across LA and the Grapevine. And again, why that's important is the freight that Michael talked about coming out of the ports. If they can't get over the Grapevine or Tejon, and that happened last year during a series of storms, they're going 101. And if they have to go over 101, it takes a lot longer. Traffic is bottlenecked, and it takes a lot longer for that traffic to get where it needs to go. Those bridges were deficient in clearance, they were deficient in load capacity, and we had not been able to address those deficiencies over the last decade or longer. So this allowed us to address those deficiencies. The other thing I want you to know is we're not doing business as usual. We understand the importance of being more nimble. We got the packaging out for these bridges in 2 months, the project initiation document. We're going through the environmental process appropriately, but we're going to design, bid, build these projects. We're trying to be as flexible and as nimble as we can on these projects. The other thing I think that was talked about earlier is the California State Rail Plan, and there is a hearing at LA Metro on November 15th from 4:30 to 7:30, and I wanted to mention that. Active Transportation Program that Mark Christoffels talked about from the San Gabriel COG, and Colleen from San Diego from Sandag, both mentioned, was the first mile, last mile transportation link. We're also very active in, we're very, pun intended, very active in participating in that as well, and understand how important that is. We have ambitious goals to double walking and triple bicycling trips by 2020, reduce bicycle and pedestrian fatalities by 10% each year, and also want to point out that 25% of active transportation program funds are designated for disadvantaged communities. And Michael talked more about transit and capital operations, and I'm not sure if he mentioned that $45 million a year in new funds are targeted toward inner city and commuter rail funding, $45 million a year in new funds. And in transit and inner city rail capital funding, there's $250 million a year annually. So that's new money, which is pretty exciting. SB1, and I think this is a major emphasis, at least that the governor wanted to share when he came to Los Angeles and spoke, was the focus on small and disadvantaged businesses. And at least the message from Secretary Kelly to the district directors was, we want to make sure that we're getting the word out that SB1 is going to focus on making sure that we're hitting our, not just our goal of 25% participation by small, women-owned, minority-owned businesses, but that it's now in statute that we're doing that. We're enhancing our outreach, training and mentorship program, and in fact, we have a reporting obligation to you now, and we're going to publish the information about contracting opportunities on the web, in minority newspapers and trade publications. The goal is to increase outreach by up to 100% of the dollar value of the contracts and procurements awarded in those business communities. So we're ramping up on those efforts in Los Angeles and Ventura, San Diego, San Bernardino, Ontario, and all of Southern California. In sustainability, under the SB1, where feasible and effective, we're using material that's recycled in construction to reduce greenhouse gases. And I know we were talking about autonomous vehicles earlier, and one of the things that we are doing is restriping 50,000 lane miles from 4 to 6 inches to be more innovative. It's going to make it easier for drivers to see, regular drivers, not just autonomous drivers, but also for the autonomous vehicles. Next August, here in Los Angeles and Ventura, we'll begin striping 250 center lane miles on I-5, I-10, and Route 101. 6,300 lane miles will be completed over the next decade in California on all of those 3 main routes across California. And that will be for the autonomous vehicles to read those lines. So we are working with industry, with Google and Tesla, and we're working with DMV on those regulations statewide. We're installing 76 Bluetooth detector systems on existing freeway electrical boxes and poles around the LA area. And we're also working on complete street elements, multimodal park and ride elements, so you can ride, bike, or walk once you reach your to get to your destination as part of that effort. Okay, I think I got to my end. Californians drive more than 350 billion miles a year, more than any other state. And our highway system is the engine that moves our economy. So I want to thank you for allowing me to give the presentation. I hope we can send you the link to the video. It is good, I think. So I hope you get a chance to see it, and I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to speak.
Well, we thank you for your presentation. And let me just say, I think all of those of you who were part of the panels in your presentation today. They were very informative, giving us some additional insight in terms of not only the planning and sustainability strategies, but also economic development and how we are going to be managing the new resources that will be coming in from SB1 to address, I think, in many cases, cities' deferred maintenance for so many decades. And so this creates a great opportunity for local cities to be able to do some projects that they haven't been able to do for a long time. I was also very excited to see how Metrolink has utilized bus passes and transit passes, which we're working on, and so we look forward to working with you, Art, to help us identify some strategies to get the governor on board with that very important program. But Carrie, thank you for your leadership in Caltrans, and we're looking forward to any questions that Mr. Gloria or myself might have, but we're going to look to you first, and then we'll turn to the public and make our way through that process and then try to be done no later than 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the panelists, well, actually both panelists for the presentations. I would just start with Mr. Turner's presentation. You get a gold star for using a San Diego photo right at the start. I believe that's our San Diego Charlie. It's our pride and joy, and I appreciate you including that. And I just appreciate your overall comments. Yeah. I think, Mr. Chairman, a part of probably why this is on the agenda for sustainability discussion is that sustainability often is discussed in terms of green or not green relative to the environment, but there's no sustainability if there's not funded properly. And I thought your comments were spot on, not just about what this can do, but what's at risk if it's undone. And I appreciate everything that you said along those lines. I think it's very important. In the last 24 hours, I've certainly had a number of people say things that were not factual. And so as you laid out very clearly, these dollars go for the maintenance of built infrastructure, also building capacity, protections that are in there. These are all things I think is important for folks who are on the ground doing the work or leaders in the state to put on the record over and over again, because for whatever reason, people love to be told that you can have everything and pay nothing for it, yet we see over and over again that simply is not true. Your comments, I think, made that point the clearest, so thank you for those, and for the photo of San Diego. I wanted to move perhaps to the next thing, though, because of what you noted that was at risk, and this is perhaps for Mr. Weiss or Ms. Bowen. Ms. Bowen, you made mention of the factoid of $1 billion equaling out to about 13,000 jobs. Did I hear that correctly? Very good. And I think that within Mr. Weiss's presentation, which was a home run for our first time or 2 weeks on the job or whatever it is that you said, but for all the data points for dollars that or projects that are out on the, I would recommend that as often as the CTC or as Caltrans talk about projects under SB1, it's not just the dollar amounts, it's not just the project names, but it's the jobs that are created next to it. So if that's I-5 widening in San Diego County, if you can connect that up and make the point over and over again that those who wish to do SB1 harm, it's not that necessarily they're doing, well, they're certainly doing themselves harms as users of the system. They're doing the state harm as eroding our ability to do economic development of the sixth largest economy, but it's doing their neighbor harm because we're talking about, as you said, 13,000 jobs for every $1 billion. So I'm not a math major, but I know it's about $5 billion a year, and so that's real money. That's real Californians. And I think it was to Mr. Miller's comments that these are Californians that we're talking about because of some of the agreements that are in place on a local level. We're talking about Californians whose jobs are at risk. So I would just make that observation or just that suggestion as presentations are made. The dollars become so big that for the average constituent I have in, say, North Park in my district, when you're talking about billions of dollars, it's hard to grasp. It's hard to seem relevant to their lives. But they understand what a job is. And when we talk about it in those terms and those people level terms, I think it does us better as we move toward probably having to defend this at the ballot box eventually. And did you want to respond to that?
I just have a question. So you want the project specific identified?
I think that as you make these efforts, And all the materials, I've actually seen the video. I think all of them are fantastic, and I acknowledge the speed and the efficiency with which a lot of this is getting done. And so a lot of this is sort of, getting the plane in the air and doing that sort of stuff. But I think on a go-forward basis, as much as possible that you can tie it back to the jobs that we're talking about, I think that's extremely important. It's not politicking, it's not campaigning, it's stating facts about who's actually working. And again, going back to Mr. Miller's presentation of, the thousands of people in the LA area, I know that the same is true in the San Diego area. We're talking about folks here, and I just think that that's relevant data. And when I talk to my constituents, they seem to be data hungry. They want to know everything that's going on. They want all the, I have town hall meetings not for my personal health, but because my constituents demand access and information. I think that's an information point that we shouldn't bury. I think that we should highlight as much as possible. And that's just a personal observation. Question I did have for Caltrans, one of the protections that's in place beyond the constitutional amendment that's anticipated is the hiring of an inspector general for Caltrans. Has that been done?
Not yet.
Gentleman behind you, Mr. Weiss is...
Yes, there was just somebody appointed by the governor, I believe it was the 16th, recently.
I also think that that's important because the ACA is not voted on by the public for about a year or thereabouts, right? And because the money is now being assessed, I think that's extremely important to people to understand that there's a cop on the beat. There's people holding you accountable, holding me accountable. So if that hire has been made, I think that that's important to explain to the public. Is there some disagreement on that?
Well, the question was whether it needed confirmation, and I don't know that the position does or doesn't need confirmation.
The position does need confirmation from the Senate. And so I guess a name has been presented.
That's great.
Well, there are some questions that are being raised around it, but I think that at least the process is moving forward.
I think it's important. You can react to a nominee, but you can't react to just a position that's been open, that's been created, but not filled or attempting to be filled. So I think that that's an important data point that also should be sort of touted from the rooftops, because I have a lot of folks that I think are open to the idea of understanding that nothing is free, but they also want to know about the protections. I can talk to them all day long about ACA 5, but I think having someone there every day watching the dollars as they flow is extremely important information for the average Californian. So just those general observations or comments. The last two things I would just say, Mr. Miller, thank you for your comments. Thank you for the work that your members do. Yes, we don't always love seeing them out and about, but we like what they do on the back end. We like the end result of their work, and that's hard work, but your point is, I think, extremely well made. The jobs, and this is sort of driving home the point on the data points for these projects, this is a middle-class enhancing program. Right. These are jobs that, for absent these opportunities, these folks may not be able to find a sustainable living wage job with a career path with the benefits that allow you to live in a state as expensive as California. And so I appreciate the focus on that, because as you, I think, alluded to, too often that gets missed. Those folks are not often heard from in positions of powers in city halls and Capitol buildings and whatnot. I know that's what you do on a daily basis, but we all, I think, owe it to the middle class of this state to talk about it as often as possible. And I think particularly for me, we're talking about transportation today, but the link to housing is extremely important, and these two issues cannot be divided. Good paying job doesn't mean a lot if it all goes to rent, right? The nexus and the last mile solution, all of this is connected and all linked up together. The last thing I would say, as an old city councilman, is to the extent that these dollars flow to local city halls for road repair, resurfacing, resealing, what have you, I would hope that the state is leading, and this is where, Mr. Chairman, as a leader on transportation for California, maybe we can work on this, is making sure that these folks on the local level are taking every opportunity as they repave a street that they put in a bike lane. Right, it's a can of paint. Right, it's de minimis. If they're going to paint this, they're going to stripe the street anyway. But in my experiences, we could do that in many places. You can often do that through discretion. It's just as we look at those mode share shift goals that we have, I'm hopeful that on the local level, people are seeing this as the opportunity that's there. They may not have been able to pave that road in 25 years. This may be the first time they're able to do it. Well, whilst they're considering that, could they potentially look for the pedestrian, active transportation, bicycling, even transit opportunities that are there? This shouldn't be seen and certainly the opponents to SB1 are going to use every opportunity to say this isn't about making traffic congestion any easier. They are wrong when they say that. But I think one way that we can talk about the multimodal nature of this or use some of the other dollars is by encouraging local jurisdictions to take the opportunity not just to resurface the road, but to make it work along the lines of what Colleen was presenting of being a complete street with some of those active transportation, pedestrian safety, life-saving interventions that ought to be there. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for letting me eat up so much time. As you can tell, I'm extremely passionate about transportation. I learned it all from my time on MTS and on Sandag. But I'm really excited about what we can do, not just to make it greener and cleaner, but to actually fund it for the long haul. As was mentioned, I like the data point about this being the biggest investment since the 1970s. Not to make anyone groan, but I mean, I was born in the late 70s. That shows you how long it has taken to actually take this seriously. And with respect for the person who said it, this was not a hard vote. I was elected by the people of California, the people of my district, to go up and get things done. And while the generation has passed since anyone ever chose to take up the issue of traffic, about congestion, about road repair, if we're not here to do these kinds of decisions, right, Mr. Holden, then what are we here for? I think ultimately, while people have to live through some orange vests and helmets and kind of to deal with that for the short haul, I believe in the near-term future, they're going to see their quality of life has improved, a lot of jobs have been created, and the state's economy has been burnished. This is why that was not a difficult vote. It was the right vote for California. And I look forward to working with everyone in this room to prove that to the public over the next number of months and years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. Amen. I would like to call on a couple of the folks who've given us a speaker's card.